back to my series on the major scale. My name is Alexandra, and I am a 10-year-old guitarist from the good old US of A. I don't know how to sell this to you, so I'll be straight. We have a need to learn how to play large intervals on the guitar. I mean, really play them, like across the strings. In this lesson, I'll cover the basic principles applying to all intervals and all guitar tunings. The main focus in the examples will be on the standard tuning and the perfect intervals: perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and perfect octave. In rock music, these intervals are the main ingredients of power chords. The perfect octave features 5 octave patterns or shape that every guitar player must commit to memory. Among other things, the octaves marks the end of most scales, including the major scale. You can find the shapes in other places on the internet, but I will help you understand how they come about. In our first lesson on the major scale, we have seen that unisons, that is, intervals made up of 2 identical notes, can be played on adjacent strings. If the second note is played on a higher pitched string, the next string as you look down on your fretboard, it must be played at a location that is 5 frets toward the nut. In standard tuning, an exception is made for the strings G and B, for which the location of the second note is 4 frets toward the nut. These offsets will be different in other tunings. It is useful to think as the offsets as negative numbers if they're pointing toward the nut, and positive if they're pointing toward the bridge. In our first lesson on the major scale, I was indifferent to the sign, but here I correct the unison exercise slide by marking the offsets as negative in the first system and positive in the second. Let us recall how we play a melodic interval on the same string. Melodic means that the 2 notes forming the interval are played in succession, one after the other. Say we want to play a major second, which has the size of 2 semitones. If the major second is ascending, then the fret displacement is +2. The second note in the interval is played by jumping 2 frets toward the bridge, like this. If the major second is descending, then the fret displacement is -2. The second note in the interval is played by jumping 2 frets toward the nut, like this. Once and for all, remember that positive displacements are toward the bridge and negative displacements are toward the nut. That's how the guitar works. Given enough string, we could play any interval by using Rule 1 on the slide. For intervals larger than 3 semitones, it is difficult to do so. We have to shift our hands, and we may even get lost while trying to do it. For example, a perfect fourth is an interval spanning 5 semitones. On a single string, you would be playing it like this: ascending and descending. It's correct, but prone to errors. It's better to play intervals larger than 3 semitones across adjacent strings. To do that, we use Rule 2 on this slide, which is that the fret displacement is the sum between the unison offset and the signed interval size. You have to remember the sign convention and exercise common sense, so to speak. Develop a feel for when the formula is useful. For example, say you want to play a descending perfect fourth with the first note being this A3 at the 12th fret on the A string and the second note on the D string. The signed interval size is -5, and the unison offset for going from the A string to the D string is also -5. The displacement is -5 plus -5 equals -10. So you can play the perfect fourth like this. The interval sounds fine, so our formula works, but this way of playing is more difficult than even playing on a single string. Now, if you decide to play the second note on the E string instead of D, then again, the signed interval size is -5, but the unison offset is now +5. The displacement is minus 5 plus 5, which is 0. The melodic interval becomes so easy to play, like this. And since two different strings are used, we can play the interval harmonically, meaning that the two notes are played at the same time, like this. This slide contains exercises to practice playing perfect fourth and major second intervals across strings. You can see me playing the exercises for major seconds in our first video on the major scale. There, the displacements were called offsets. I changed my mind, and from now on I use the name offsets only for displacements that are needed in order to compensate for something else. For example, the unison offsets compensate for the fact that the neighboring strings are tuned differently. In contrast, a two-fret displacement on the same string is simply the way we get a major second. No compensatory action is implied. Let me play the perfect fourth exercise for you. Ascending. And descending. You should practice the exercise enough to become comfortable with the semitone shift toward the bridge that happens when we cross from the G string to the B string, and the semitone shift toward the nut that happens when we cross over from the B string to the G string. For the other pairs of adjacent strings, there is no shift at all when playing perfect fourths in standard tuning. Easy peasy. A power chord, or fifth chord, is in actuality a perfect fifth interval played harmonically. I am showing here the G5 power chord. The root of the chord is G and forms the bass voice. The other note is D and is a fifth above G, hence the name of the chord G5. The lowest and highest notes of a chord are said to form the bass and soprano voices, respectively. The names are borrowed from singing, where they denote the lowest and highest ranges for a human voice. A chord with the root in the bass is said to be in root position. Now remember the principle of octave equivalence, which we illustrated in our first lesson by altering the world-famous Haw cross buns. If we replace a note by another that is one or more octaves away, we pretty much hear the same melody or harmony. I can therefore take the root of our chord and move it one octave higher. By doing so, I get what is called an inversion of the G5 chord. In the inversion, the fifth is now the bass and the root is in the soprano. The famous riff for Smoke on the Water is played by using inverted power chords. Inverted power chords are actually perfect fourth intervals. Instead of replacing the root in the bass, the root duplicate could be added to the existing chord. The root now appears in both the bass and the soprano voices. This chord has 3 different pitches, but only 2 pitch classes. It is said to represent a so-called voicing of the root position 5 chord. Because the root appears in both the bass and the soprano, this voicing sounds very convincing in marking the end of a musical phrase. We used it on our second lesson to conclude the song Scarborough Fair. We've seen how easy it is to play perfect fourth intervals across strings. How about larger intervals, say octaves? To avoid large displacements that may require shifting the fretting hand, we must jump across multiple strings. To do so, we decompose the large interval into smaller intervals, and then we imagine jumping across adjacent strings as if to play these smaller intervals in succession. We only play the starting and the final notes, though. This technique is correct and applies to all tunings, but it is not very fast unless the smaller intervals have particularly simple fret displacements when played across strings. In standard tuning, the perfect fourth intervals are the simplest to play across strings because their fret displacements are equal to 0 for all pairs of adjacent strings. The exception is, of course, the string pair G and B, for which the displacement is +1 going from G to B and -1 going from B to G. We can therefore decompose the big interval into multiple perfect fourth intervals and one smaller interval. The perfect fourth intervals are taken to be ascending if the original large interval is ascending and descending otherwise. The small interval can be either ascending or descending. How large should the small interval be? Well, thinking that you have 4 active fingers on the fretting hand, you can play a minor third interval between your index and pinky with essentially no stretching. The small interval may therefore vary between a descending minor third and an ascending minor third. In other words, the side size of the small interval is allowed to vary anywhere in between -3 and +3. Of course, you can use a larger range if you have bigger hands. We imagine playing the smaller interval on the same string, and so it contributes the most to the final displacement. We imagine playing the perfect fourths across strings, and so they contribute nothing to the fret displacement unless one of the string pairs is G and B. How many strings do we cross? If you have no perfect fourth interval in the partition, you stay on the same string. If you have one perfect fourth interval, you cross one string. To count the cross strings, it helps to imagine that you start and stop right before the initial and final strings. If you have 2 perfect fourths, you cross 2 strings, and so on. The number of crossed strings equals the number of perfect fourth intervals. A good strategy to practice the intervals is to start with a small interval played on the same string and keep adding perfect fourths to generate a family of intervals that differ through perfect fourths and are studied together. I will consider 2 examples that are of immediate use in this lesson. For now, I will limit the size of the intervals to at most 1 octave. The first exercise regards the family generated by a descending minor third. For it, the assigned interval size is -3. Starting from the note of A, it sounds like this. By adding perfect fourths, I can play an ascending major second starting from A, because -3 + 5 equals 2. A perfect fifth because 2 + 5 equals 7. And an octave because 7 + 5 equals 12. The rest of the exercise goes like this. -3 + 2 + 7 + 12. Notice the offset of +1 because I am jumping from the strings G to B. -3 + 2 + 7 + 12. -3 + 2 + 7 -3 + 2 -3. The second exercise regards the family generated by an ascending major second. For it, the assigned interval size is +2. Starting from the note of A, it sounds like this. By adding perfect fourths, I can play an ascending perfect fifth starting from A, because 2 plus 5 equals 7. And an octave because 7 plus 5 equals 12. The rest of the exercise goes like this. Again, notice the offset of +1 when I jump from the string G to B. The previous two exercises show all the ways in which one can play perfect fifths and octaves across strings. If you want to play power chords, apply one of the ways in which you can play the perfect fifth interval. You will find the second one more helpful. Here's an exercise you should practice for the 1-5-1 voicing of the power chord. Ascending. Root, perfect fifth, octave. And descending. The score you just saw contains one more exercise for the 5-1-5-1 voicing of the inverted power chord. It should be clear by now that we can create various voicings by duplicating certain tones within the arpege class. One concern with voicings, though, is their playability on the guitar. For example, the voicing 1-5-1-5 of the root position is legit but hard to play. It looks like this. Root, fifth, octave, another fifth. By comparison, the voicing 5-1-5-1 of the inversion is not that difficult to play. I think of it as the 1-5-1 root position voicing that we already studied, to which I add one more fifth in the bass to obtain 5-1-5-1. For example, if the 1-5-1 voicing has the root on the A string, all I have to do is extend the index finger to cover the same fret position on the low E string. The exercise looks like this. Note that I prefer to use a double bar whenever I can. Ascending. And descending. Get used to playing the 1-5-1 and the 5-1-5-1 voicings because they are safer to play than their two-note versions. You should try to strike cleanly the two notes in the bass and as much as you can from the others without hitting notes that are neither a root nor a fifth. Being this precise matters when playing with high gain to avoid tiny dissonances that may be amplified into clashing noise. So far, my examples were in standard tuning only, even if I promise that the theory itself works in all tunings. Let me show you how to play the 1-5-1 voicing in drop D. In this tuning, the sixth string of the guitar is lowered a full tone from the pitch E2 to D2. The thickest string can now be called the low D string. The Houston offset for going from the 6th string to the 5th string has been lowered by 2 semitones from -5 to -7. Indeed, that seems to be so with my tuning. This is the 7th fret. Does it sound the same? The unison offset is -7, and the sign size of an ascending perfect fifth interval is +7. They add up to 0. To play the bass interval of the 1-5-1 voicing, just bar the 5th and 6th strings. The entire 1-5-1 voicing is played by barring the bottom 3 strings, which you can do with the thumb. We made it to the last topic of this lesson, the octave shapes. These are the shapes one must apply in order to be able to play octave intervals in position. In position means playing across strings, without shifting hands. Even if you may not remember, we have already studied all possible octave shapes in exercises 1 and 2. Go back to those exercises and extract the perfect octaves only. Or just trust me on this. There are 3 octave shapes generated by the descending minor third family. They are There are also 4 octave shapes generated by the ascending major second family. They are These 7 shapes are the only ones that can be played without shifting hands. Given the way my exercises were conducted, the 7 shapes were played with the bass note on the 5th fret. Different intervals actually used different pitch classes. For example, this octave was A2 to A3, whereas this octave was D3 to D4. Let us shift the shapes left or right on the fretboard to make them start and end on notes in the same pitch class. For example, let's make all the intervals start and end on E's. We find out that the 7 shapes can be organized into 5 distinct positions. I colored the 5 distinct positions differently. They are known in order as 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. No kidding, you have to memorize them as given. Which position is number 1 is a bit arbitrary, but the convention is reasonable, because the note of E is the only one duplicated among the open strings in standard tuning. The 5 positions cover 1 octave, but you can repeat the shapes again in the given order, left and right, to cover as many octaves as you want. You can get other keys than E by shifting the infinite pattern. For example, if you shift the pattern to the right by 4 semitones, you obtain the octave pattern in the key of A flat. Note that in the key of A flat, the net slashes through the 4th position, so sometimes positions may be incomplete. Position 1 always starts on the key note on the high E string. I want to add that the 5 positions are often called shapes or patterns, but I prefer the term position because each one carves a precise location on the fretboard relative to the keynote on the high E string. Study the 5 octave positions. Choose a pitch class and play all the notes in the class by using the octave positions. For example, to play all the E's on my guitar, I play position 1. Then I move my index finger on the note toward the bridge. Now I play the 2nd position starting from this note. By repeating this strategy, I can play all the E's on the fretboard as follows. Position 2, position 3, position 4, position 5, position 1 again, position 2, Position 3. For each note, there are precisely 2 consecutive octave positions containing it. Relative to the note, one position is toward the nut and the other one toward the bridge. For example, this D3 on the A string is part of position 3 toward the nut and position 4 toward the bridge. The 5 positions are also known by the letters C-A-G-E-D, spelling the word caged. These letters are the names of the 5 major chords having distinct shapes in the open position. Remember those? Take this C chord, for example. The roots of the C chord are these C's. They are in the 3rd position. Because of this connection, the 3rd position is also called the C shape. The rest of the open major chords and the shape of their roots are summarized in this slide. Practice spelling out the roots of the chords following my example for the C chord. This concludes my lesson on intervals. Besides major seconds, perfect fourths, perfect fifths, and octaves, there are other intervals that are important. If you decide to study them by yourself, always study an entire family generated by a small interval at a time. Please do me a favor and subscribe with notifications on so that you are reminded of my next lesson. Bye for now.